We all want to be safe. None of us wants to be the victim of violence, but what are we willing to give up in an effort to secure that safety? And once we've paid that price, the price for the promise of safety, will we find that it is worth the cost? We'll discuss that next here on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. It's Paul Engel here once again with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me. As always, I'm going to point you to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Find out everything I'm doing here at the Constitution Study and see if you can join in, share the messages, see where I'm speaking, invite me to come speak at one of your events, either live or over the internet. Maybe you'll find another piece of information you want to share. Maybe you'll ask a question, and through that, we'll have more interactions, more ideas that we can discuss and debate here on the Constitution Study. I want to thank everybody that does share these messages and people who help me put this on, whether it's the band Rebel North who lets me use their music, or the organizations like Restore the Intent or Constitutional Grassroots Movement that help share these messages, conversations on the culture. All these deal with taking these general ideas, these messages, this idea of understanding our liberty and sharing it with as many people as possible. So with that, let's get into this idea of precrime. Now, whether you've read the book Minority Report by Philip Dick or you've watched the movie, you should be familiar not only with the idea of precrime, but also its dangers. See, once the purview of science fiction, Congress now appears to be trying to bring this violation of due process to the United States. So what is precrime? Well, Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it of or relating to law enforcement efforts and strategies to deter crime by predicting when and where criminal activities will occur. Now, it all sounds wonderful. What if we could predict when and where crimes would occur and stop them before it happened? I mean, let's face it, if you knew that you were going to be mugged at a certain time in a certain place, you probably wouldn't go there, would you? It's a general idea. What if we could deter criminals? In other words, rather than you changing your actions based on an understanding of a criminal intent, what if we could actually stop the criminals? What if we could deter them? What if they could prevent them from engaging in these crimes? Would it be worth almost any cost to you? Well, that's what it's often described as, but believe it or not, this is not the first time this type of thing has been tried, just not to this extent. You see, in an effort to deter the harmful effects and related crimes of the overuse of alcohol, we gave the federal government the authority to prohibit its manufacture in the 18th century. Quote, after 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within or the importation thereof or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories shall be subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. In layman's terms, making, selling, importing, or exporting alcohol became illegal. Now, if you know your history, you probably remember that this attempt to deter unwanted behavior, well, it didn't work out so well. See, that's why it was repealed in 1933 with the 21st Amendment. But of course, not before it had those nasty, unanticipated outcomes, the unanticipated consequences, things like, organized crime and violence. So Congress, in 1934, enacted the National Firearms Act in an effort to deter gun violence. See, it was thought by those in Congress that certain types of firearms were used primarily for the criminal element of our country, and by regulating them, it would decrease violence. Sadly, that did not work either. In fact, it was tried again in 1994 with the quote-unquote assault weapons ban, though it also failed to decrease crime. Now, not limiting themselves to crime and violence, the federal government went on to find all sorts of things that they wanted to regulate in an effort to deter some ill or other. From pharmaceuticals to recreational drugs, from light bulbs to toilets. And from building codes to vehicle safety, Congress has time and time again tried to deter what they see as bad outcomes by regulating and infringing on the rights of innocent Americans, everyday people. And now, some in Congress want to go a step farther. Submitted legislation, H.R. 838, that says to develop a national strategy to prevent targeted violence through behavioral threat assessment and management and for other purposes. This means Congress wants to develop a national strategy. Oh boy, another national strategy. They want a national strategy to prevent certain types of violence through behavioral threat assessment and management. So what is this behavioral threat assessment and management? Well, according to Section 32A of this legislation, quote, identifying individuals who are exhibiting patterns of concerning behavior that indicate an interest, motive, intention, or capability of carrying out an act of violence. Now, how could the federal government identify individuals that are exhibiting patterns of concerning behavior? Well, there are two things they would have to do. First, the federal government would have to observe each and every American, record and study the patterns of their behavior, determine what their interests and intentions are, and determine their motives and capabilities. No part of your life would be off limits, since it could include patterns of concerning behavior. Where you go, what you do, how you spend your money, all these would be necessary inputs to your behavioral threat assessment. Now, taking it to its logical conclusion, what you buy on Amazon, what you search for on Google, who you emailed yesterday, who you called or texted, what you watched on Netflix, all would have to be collected and analyzed to develop your behavioral threat assessment. Otherwise, I would expect some to claim they could miss identifying dangerous behavior. In short, this is a version of the communist China's social credit system targeted directly at the American people. Second, no behavioral threat assessment and management strategy would be complete without determining what constitutes interest, motive, or intention of carrying out violence. Would being unconvinced that man is a major contributing factor to global climate change be considered motive for carrying out an act of violence against the planet? Would using something other than a preferred pronoun be considered an act of violence against someone? Would voting for the wrong person be considered intention of carrying out an act of violence? Think this is hyperbole? Watch the news. People are being blamed for being called violent for denying climate change or for using the wrong pronoun. In New York City, I understand they've passed a rule that if you refer to someone as an illegal alien, that's a $250,000 fine. Why? Is it committing violence against them? We have candidates who claim that voting for the other person is an act of violence against the nation. And these are the people that we're going to put into power, that are going to define what an act of violence is, what constitutes an intent towards violence. In short, who gets to determine what is an intention to violence? Now, although that deals with the threat assessment, what about the management part of this strategy? See, Section 32B and C say, investigating and gathering information from multiple sources to assess whether an individual described in subparagraph A poses a threat based on articulable facts and the subsequent management of such threat if necessary. Will you be investigated, have your privacy not only invaded, but shared amongst others in an attempt to determine what you may or may not do? Based on what? What some person in government thinks might someday lead to violence? Have you watched the news lately? Some consider free speech an act of violence. Possessing a tool to defend yourself is considered violent by some. Even exercising your beliefs in public are used as an example of violence to some people. Do you really think that none of these people work in the federal government? That they might take this opportunity to suppress those who disagree with them? Really? From there, of course, the management of this threat is developed. Not something you have done, possibly not even something you've planned on doing. Just a pattern of behavior that someone else finds concerning. You will be managed based on the assessment of some government employee who may or may not have their own agenda. History shows that when we give those in government a power, they tend to exercise it to the absolute limit of what they can get away with. As Benjamin Franklin said, they who give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Are you willing to give away your rights to be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects for the promise of being kept safe? Will you sell your right to be considered innocent until proven guilty for a bowl of promises that the criminal will not get you? Will you hand over your personal sovereignty just because some in government think they can protect you better than you can protect yourself? Will you sell your children's heritage of liberty just so you can think you will be safe? And when that fails, who are you going to blame? Now, if the answer to any of these questions is yes, then I'm sad to say you deserve neither liberty nor safety. I understand the desire to be kept safe, but it's a pipe dream. And selling our rights because someone promises to keep you safe is not only a pipe dream, it's delusional. The Supreme Court has even found that the police don't have a duty to protect you. And these are the people you want to put your safety in. And you're willing to sell all of your liberties. You're willing to be monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're willing to have your privacy invaded. You're willing to have somebody else come up with what is and isn't dangerous. And you're willing to turn all of that over for this promise that the government will keep you safe. Well, first of all, they can't. It's a lie. And most of them probably know it's a lie. Because everybody I've talked to in the security industry knows that if someone really wants to get to you, they can. So if you're willing to sell your rights for this promise of a temporary safety, as Benjamin Franklin said, you don't deserve either. And that really says a lot about the American people. Because now the people working in our name, our agents, the people we hire, are considering taking over our rights, taking away our rights with the promise of keeping us safe. And what are the American people doing? I don't know, but I haven't heard a lot of Americans clamoring that this trash be thrown on the ash heap that it should. No, haven't heard it. What about you? Now, this is commonly referred to as the TAPS Act, and when was the last time you heard about that in the news? All right, let's forget the news. When was the last time you talked to your congressman about it? When was the last time you pointed out the rights that are violated by what this has to do? The only way they can create a behavioral threat assessment is to monitor your behavior. And if they're monitoring your behavior in public, well, that's only half the picture. Probably less than half. Are you willing to have your private life invaded because they promise they need it so they can keep you safe? Because it's a national security. It's a safety. We have to take away your rights to do this. Oh, they don't put it that way, but that's what they're doing. Are you willing to sell your children's heritage, your children's liberty, just for the promise to keep you safe? That's what this is. It's an empty promise that will be used to take away our rights and liberties. And many of us are doing nothing about it. And some of us are even saying, yeah, go ahead, do it. Think about what this legislation would mean. Do you want the government reading each and every one of your emails? Do you want the government know what you buy on Amazon? Do you want the government keeping track of every place you go? We all wear tracking devices. They're called cell phones. Do you want the government to keep track of every place you go? Every transaction you perform? Every person you meet? Now, I know they're collecting this data now. I have little proof, but there's been enough to say, yeah, they're collecting the data. But what are we doing about it? You see, if Congress actually works for us, why aren't we telling them, no? Why not? Why aren't we? Why aren't we up in arms? Why aren't we demanding those that claim to represent us actually represent our best interests? That includes protecting our rights, which is the purpose government was created for. So now that I've pointed this out to you, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to talk to your congressman? Are you going to actually make a stink about this? Are you going to say, no, you're not allowed to take my rights? And if you try to, we'll fire you. I bring this up because, one, I haven't heard it discussed a lot, and because of the few people I've heard talk about it, very few are recognizing what is necessary for a behavioral threat assessment. And then what happens when they start managing those threats. Because while it's one thing they're invading your privacy, what happens when Precrime becomes more like Minority Report? And you have the government now not only invading your life, what are they going to do? Are they going to take away your internet access because you have they think you have a trend that might involve violent speech? Are they going to take away your website or your access to Facebook because you've shown a tendency that they think might lead to violent expressions? Are they going to take away your right to buy certain products because, well, they see a tendency that you might use them for violence? What happens to the management? I really hope that this made you think. I really hope that this kind of opened your eyes to more than just the promise of safety, but how do we get there? And let's not forget, nowhere in the Constitution is the government given the authority, the federal government given the authority to keep us safe. Yes, the common defense, the general welfare and the common defense, that's the common defense, not the individual defense. Are you willing to hand over your ability to defend yourself to a government that's proven it can't? And in doing so, hand over the most precious rights we have. So I hope this episode made you think. I'm curious what you think about this. What are you willing to give up for a promise of safety? Put in the comments. Let me know. Head to the website. Ask a question. Most of all, share this with friends and family. Let them know that this act that sounds so good really has a lot of evil underneath it. And then once you've done that, come back again next time and we'll discuss what else is going on next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.